Part 1. The Winter of 1878. The winter of 1878 etched its fury into the jagged peaks of the Rocky Mountains, a season so brutal it became legend, not for its towering snowdrifts or bone-chilling gales, but for the souls who defied its wrath. This is the saga of Sarah Red Willow, a Cheyenne mother, and her 7-year-old son, Caleb, who stared death in the face during that merciless season. It is also the story of Ethan Caldwell, a lone rancher whose heart, tempered by loss, extended a lifeline that wove 3 lives into a tapestry of survival, compassion, and something deeper than fate. Some tales lie buried beneath the frost, waiting for the thaw to reveal their truth. This is one such tale. Before we dive into the heart of it, let me know where you're joining us from. Drop a comment below. And if this story stirs your soul, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow I've got something extraordinary waiting just for you. Snowflakes drifted from a leaden sky like whispered indictments, each flake thickening the white shroud that smothered the Colorado frontier. Sarah Red Willow stood at the edge of her shattered world, the remnants of her Cheyenne village smoldering behind her. Her son Caleb's small hand gripped hers, his breath puffing into fleeting clouds in the frigid air. Behind them, a skeletal plume of smoke curled from the ashes of their longhouse, a ghostly accusation against the heavens. 3 days earlier, a raid had torn their lives apart. Settlers from the nearby town of Clearwater, their blood heated by whiskey and old grudges, had struck when the Cheyenne hunters were away on a winter trek, leaving only women, children, and elders to face the onslaught. The attackers hadn't anticipated resistance. They hadn't reckoned with Sarah. She fought like a she-wolf, wielding her late husband's bone-handled knife with a ferocity that sent 2 men reeling, buying precious moments for a handful of children to scatter into the pines. But the flames spread too fast, devouring homes and hope alike. When dawn broke, Sarah stood alone with Caleb amidst the wreckage. The surviving elders had led the remaining Cheyenne westward, seeking distant kin before the winter tightened its grip. Sarah, however, refused to flee. Not yet. Her sister Abigail and her infant nephew had vanished in the chaos. For 2 days, she scoured the ruins, traced fading tracks into the snow-choked forest, and called their names until her voice cracked like brittle ice. Now, as the snow fell heavier, Sarah faced a bitter truth. Abigail and her baby were either lost to the flames or had fled in another direction. With a storm gathering strength, she could no longer risk Caleb's life in a futile search. "Mama," Caleb whispered, his voice a fragile thread against the vast white silence. "Are we going to find the others now?" Sarah knelt, adjusting the oversized buffalo hide coat she'd salvaged from the debris. Caleb's face, sharp with hunger, mirrored his father's, high cheekbones, copper skin, and eyes fierce with trust despite the hollows beneath them. His father had been taken by smallpox 2 winters ago, a white man's plague that spared no mercy. "Yes, little one," she said, though she knew the tribe's trail would be erased by now, swallowed by the relentless snow. "We'll find a new home." She gathered their meager possessions, a small pouch of dried venison, a water skin, a singed blanket, her husband's knife, and a single beaded moccasin, Abigail's, kept as both relic and vow. If her sister lived, Sarah would find her when spring softened the world. The first day of their journey was grueling but passable. Sarah knew these forests, had hunted them with her father and later her husband, learning the secret paths where pines stood sentinel against the wind. She guided Caleb through hidden glades and shallow caves that offered fleeting shelter. But on the 2nd day, the storm broke with biblical fury. The wind screamed like a banshee, hurling ice shards that sliced through their clothing. Snow fell so thickly that Sarah could barely see her own outstretched hand. "Stay close," she told Caleb, tying a leather cord between their wrists. "If you can't see me, you'll feel me." They pressed on, each step a defiance of nature's wrath. Sarah's legs burned, her lungs seared by the Arctic air. Twice Caleb stumbled, and twice she hauled him up, brushing snow from his lashes and whispering encouragements the wind tore away. By dusk, they'd barely covered half the distance she'd planned. Their refuge, a shallow hollow beneath a granite overhang, offered scant protection. Sarah wrapped the blanket around Caleb, shielding him with her body. "Tell me about the prairielands," he murmured through chattering teeth, invoking their old game of warmth and memory. Sarah closed her eyes, summoning visions of summer to fend off the night's bite. "The prairielands are where rivers dance under open skies," she began, her voice a steady drum against the storm's chaos. "Buffalo roam in herds so vast they shake the earth. Wildflowers paint the meadows in colors no painter could dream, reds and golds that sing of life. There the berries grow plump as your fist, bursting sweet as a kept promise." Caleb nestled closer, his shivers easing as her words wove a tapestry of warmth. Eventually he drifted into sleep, but Sarah remained vigilant, her gaze fixed on the swirling dark, her hand resting on the knife at her belt. The night stretched into eternity, the wind's mournful wail a requiem for the lost. When dawn crept in, it was a pale, joyless thing, the sun a ghostly orb behind veils of cloud. Sarah's limbs were stiff, her fingers numb as she roused Caleb. His eyes fluttered open, confusion giving way to the weight of their reality. "I dreamed of the prairielands," he said softly. "Papa was there and Aunt Abigail with her baby." Sarah's throat tightened. "A good dream," she managed, helping him stand. "Maybe a sign our path is true." But as they emerged, her heart sank. The storm had reshaped the landscape, burying landmarks beneath drifts taller than Caleb. The trail she'd planned was gone, indistinguishable from the endless white. Still, they couldn't stay. Their food was nearly gone, the venison rationed to slivers that barely dulled their hunger. Using the faint sun and her knowledge of the mountains, Sarah chose a direction, praying it would lead to salvation. The descent into despair. The third day of Sarah, Red Willow, and Caleb's trek through the Rocky Mountains was a crucible, forging their will against a cold that seemed to hate the living. The temperature plummeted, as if winter itself had taken offense at their defiance. Though the snowfall eased, a razor-sharp wind scoured the landscape, whipping snow into stinging clouds that blinded Sarah's vision to mere arm's length. Caleb, his small frame battered by the elements, could no longer walk unaided. Sarah hoisted him onto her back, his arms looping around her neck, his face pressed against her shoulder to shield it from the gale. Her legs quaked with each step, muscles screaming, joints grinding like unoiled hinges under the strain of cold and exhaustion. Yet she pressed on, driven by a mother's fierce love and the stubborn grit that had carried her through a life of hardship. "Sing me the buffalo song," Caleb mumbled, his voice faint against her ear, barely audible above the wind's howl. Sarah's lips, cracked and bleeding, forced themselves into motion. The ancient Cheyenne chant emerged as a hoarse whisper, its rhythm a lifeline to hope. "Ho, brothers of the plains, swift hooves that thunder." The words, sacred to her people, were stolen by the storm almost as soon as they left her mouth, but she sang on, the cadence tethering her to memories of sunlit prairies and communal fires. Caleb's breathing steadied, his trust in her unbroken even as the world conspired against them. As the feeble daylight began to fade, disaster struck with the suddenness of a rattlesnake's bite. Sarah, her vision blurred by fatigue and frost, misjudged a snow-covered slope. The ground betrayed her, crumbling beneath her feet. She clutched Caleb tightly as they tumbled down a steep ravine, snow clogging her mouth, her nose, her eyes. The world spun, a chaos of white and pain, until they slammed to a stop at the bottom. Agony exploded in Sarah's left ankle, a white-hot flare that nearly stole her breath. She bit back a scream, easing Caleb aside to inspect the injury. Through her leggings and moccasin, the swelling was grotesque, the joint twisted unnaturally. When she tried to stand, her ankle buckled, refusing to bear her weight. Panic, a foe she'd kept at bay until now, clawed at her resolve. A night in this exposed ravine, with no shelter and temperatures plunging, would be their last. "Mama," Caleb's voice trembled, his stoic mask cracking to reveal raw fear. "Are you hurt?" Sarah forced a smile, though it felt like a lie. "Just a little, my heart. We'll rest here a moment." Her eyes swept the surroundings, desperation sharpening her senses. The ravine's walls loomed steep on three sides, but to the east, the slope appeared gentler. If she could craft a crutch from a branch, they might climb out, find refuge before night claimed them. "Caleb," she said, steadying her voice, "I need you to be my brave warrior. Can you find a strong branch, about as tall as you?" The boy nodded, his exhaustion momentarily eclipsed by purpose. He scoured the area, vanishing briefly behind snow mounds as he hunted for a suitable stick. Sarah seized the moment to bind her ankle, tearing a strip from her tattered dress. Each movement sent fresh waves of pain up her leg, but she worked with grim precision, her numb fingers fumbling in the cold. "Mama!" Caleb's shout echoed off the ravine walls, sharp with excitement. "Mama, look!" Sarah's head snapped up, expecting to see him waving a branch. Instead, he stood 20 paces away, pointing at something beyond her sight line. "Smoke! I see smoke!" Hope and dread warred in Sarah's chest. Smoke meant fire, warmth, perhaps food, but it also meant people. After the Clearwater raid, strangers were a gamble she feared to take. Yet with their food gone and her ankle useless, exposure would kill them long before they reached their tribe. Smoke was their only chance. "Help me up," she instructed. Caleb rushed to her side, his thin shoulder bracing her as she struggled to her feet. Pain seared her vision, but she gritted her teeth, leaning heavily on her son. "Show me." Caleb guided her to his vantage point, pointing through a gap in the pines where a slender column of smoke rose against the darkening sky. It was close, maybe a mile, but with her injury it felt like crossing the Great Plains. "We'll go there," Sarah decided, her voice firm despite the fear churning within. "But we must be cautious. If it's men from Clearwater," she didn't finish. Caleb, young as he was, understood the stakes. With agonizing slowness, they began their trek toward the smoke. Sarah fashioned a crude crutch from a fallen branch, but Caleb's small frame bore much of her weight, his steps straining against the uneven terrain. The light bled away, the forest plunging into a darkness so thick it seemed to swallow hope. The wind sharpened, cutting through their threadbare clothes like a skinning knife. Sarah's strength waned, her ankle a throbbing beacon threatening to drag her into unconsciousness. "A little farther," she urged, as much for herself as for Caleb. Just a little farther. The boy's breaths came in labored gasps, his steps faltering. Sarah knew he was nearing collapse. Without shelter soon, even her warmth wouldn't save him through the night. It was Caleb who spotted the cabin first, his sharp eyes catching the squared silhouette against the forest's organic shadows. Smoke curled from a stone chimney, and a faint amber glow spilled from a single window, a lighthouse in the endless dark. Sarah halted, pulling Caleb close. "Remember," she whispered in Cheyenne, "we approach openly but stay sharp. If I say run, you run. Don't look back." Caleb's face, barely visible, was solemn as he nodded. She knew he'd never abandon her, but the command was a ritual, a brace against the danger ahead. They emerged from the tree line, limping toward the cabin through snow that reached Caleb's waist in places. Halfway across the clearing, Sarah's crutch sank into a drift, throwing her off balance. She fell hard, a cry of pain escaping before she could stifle it. The cabin door flew open, spilling light across the snow like molten gold. A tall figure stood framed in the doorway, the unmistakable outline of a rifle in his hands. "Who's out there?" The voice was deep, weathered, carrying the weight of solitude but not immediate malice. "Show yourself." Sarah pushed herself onto her elbows, shielding Caleb behind her despite his efforts to help her rise. "We mean no harm," she called, her voice ragged from cold and disuse. "Please, my son needs shelter." The figure stepped forward, rifle still raised, moving cautiously into the pool of light. He was a man, broad-shouldered, with a thick beard masking much of his face. His wool coat, leather boots, and fur-lined hat spoke of a life carved from the frontier's harsh edges. "You're," he began, then stopped, the rifle dipping as he took in the sight. A Cheyenne woman crumpled in the snow, a boy at her side, both teetering on the edge of survival. "Indians," Sarah finished, her tone defiant despite her vulnerability. "Will you shoot us, or let the cold finish the job?" For a long moment the man was silent. Caleb's small hand slipped into hers, squeezing with fading strength. Sarah had staked their lives on this moment, and now they'd learn if her gamble would save or doom them. Then, to her astonishment, the man lowered his rifle completely. Without a word, he strode through the snow, his long legs cutting a path to their side. Up close, his eyes were a startling blue, like a summer sky trapped in winter, assessing but not cruel. "You're hurt," he observed, his gaze dropping to her poorly bound ankle. Sarah nodded, exhaustion sapping her defiance. "We fell. My son needs warmth." The man's eyes shifted to Caleb, who stared back with a mix of fear and defiance that swelled Sarah's heart despite their plight. "Ethan Caldwell," he said abruptly, as if making a choice. "This is my ranch, or what's left of it." A flicker of sorrow crossed his face, quickly masked. Before Sarah could respond, he handed the rifle to Caleb, a shocking gesture of trust, and bent to lift her into his arms as if she were no heavier than a child. Caleb gasped, stepping forward to protect her, but Sarah shook her head. "It's all right," she said softly in Cheyenne. "He's helping us." As Ethan carried her toward the cabin, Caleb trailed behind, clutching the rifle awkwardly in his small hands. Sarah felt a tangle of relief and unease. They had found refuge, perhaps salvation, but at what cost? What would this solitary rancher demand in return? And when the storm broke, what would become of them? The cabin door swung open, ushering them into a haven of warmth and light, leaving those questions unanswered as the wind howled at their backs. A haven in the storm. The cabin door thudded shut behind them, sealing out the Rocky Mountain wind's feral howl, and wrapping Sarah Red Willow and her son Caleb in a cocoon of unexpected warmth. Sarah blinked, her eyes adjusting to the amber glow of a lantern that cast long shadows across the rough-hewn logs. Ethan Caldwell set her down gently on a sturdy oak chair by the hearth, where a fire crackled like a storyteller spinning tales of survival. Caleb stood frozen, clutching Ethan's rifle with the reverence of a boy handed a sacred relic, his dark eyes tracking the rancher's every move. "You can set that by the door, son," Ethan said, his voice gruff but softened by a frontier kindness. "No one's drawing iron tonight." Caleb glanced at Sarah, seeking her guidance. She nodded once, and he carefully propped the rifle against the wall, his movements deliberate, as if handling a ceremonial lance. His gaze never left Ethan, wary as a young coyote in unfamiliar territory. Ethan crouched before Sarah, his calloused hands hovering over her swollen ankle. "May I?" he asked, his directness carrying no trace of the condescension Sarah had come to expect from white men. There was a quiet respect in his tone, like a man who'd learned to tread lightly on others' pride. She inclined her head, granting permission. His touch was surprisingly gentle as he unwrapped her makeshift bandage, revealing the bruised and bloated flesh beneath. His brow furrowed, lines deepening in his weathered face. "Not broken," he declared after a moment's inspection. "Bad sprain, though. You're lucky." Another hour out there. He didn't finish, but the unspoken truth hung heavy. The mountains spared no one without a fight. Sarah met his gaze, her exhaustion tempered by resolve. "My name is Sarah Red Willow," she said formally, her English precise despite the ache in her bones. "This is my son Caleb." Ethan nodded, rising to his full height. In the lantern's glow, Sarah saw he was younger than she'd first thought, mid-30s perhaps, with crow's feet etched by sun and wind, not age. His beard, full but neatly trimmed, framed a face that spoke of hard winters and harder losses. His clothes, a wool shirt and patched denim, were clean, mended with care, a testament to a life of self-reliance. "You both need food and rest," he said, moving toward a cast-iron stove in the corner. "Got venison stew simmering. Ain't no feast for 4th of July barn dance, but it'll warm your bones." As Ethan ladled stew into wooden bowls, Sarah surveyed the cabin. It was small but solid, built to defy the mountain's wrath. Logs were chinked with clay to bar drafts, and the single room served as kitchen, parlor, and bedroom, with a calico curtain partitioning a corner, likely Ethan's sleeping area. Shelves lined one wall, stocked with frontier essentials: sacks of flour and cornmeal, mason jars of pickled beets and beans, dried sage and thyme hanging in fragrant bundles. Tools, an axe, a crosscut saw, coils of hemp rope, hung from pegs, each in its place, nothing wasted. The order spoke of a man who'd made peace with solitude, or at least learned to endure it. Caleb edged closer to Sarah, his eyes wide as he took in this strange world. For a boy raised in a Cheyenne village, where longhouses hummed with communal life, this isolated cabin, home to a single soul, must have felt as alien as a Whitman poem read aloud in a sweat lodge. "Here," Ethan said, returning with 3 steaming bowls balanced in his large hands. "Eat while it's hot." Sarah accepted hers with a murmured thanks, then helped Caleb settle beside her. The first spoonful of stew nearly unraveled her composure. Rich with venison, carrots, and wild onions, it was a symphony of flavors after days of starvation. Beside her, Caleb let out a soft gasp of delight, quickly stifled as he recalled their precarious situation. Sarah rested a hand on his shoulder, granting permission to savor this fleeting bounty. They ate in silence, the fire's crackle and the wind's distant wail the only sounds. Ethan stood, leaning against a pine table, his gaze occasionally drifting to the window where snow piled high on the sill. His stance reminded Sarah of a stag at dusk, alert, poised, ready to bolt at the first snap of a twig. When they finished, Ethan collected their bowls and set them in a tin wash basin. "You'll sleep there," he said, nodding to a low pallet near the fire, layered with quilts that bore the careful stitches of a woman's hand. "I'll take the loft." Sarah followed his gesture, noticing a ladder leading to a small platform tucked under the slanted roof. Relief washed through her. He was offering space, privacy, a barrier between them as they slept, a small but profound courtesy. "Thank you," she said simply, "for the food, for shelter." Ethan shrugged, uneasy with gratitude, like a man unaccustomed to praise. "No one survives these mountains alone in winter," he replied. "Not Cheyenne, not settlers, not even fools who think they can." A shadow crossed his tone, bitterness perhaps, or a lesson carved deep. Before Sarah could probe, he turned to bank the fire, his movements brisk. "Water's in that pitcher," he said over his shoulder. Outhouse is out back, but with your ankle, there's a chamber pot under the pallet till morning. I'll keep the curtain drawn. He paused, then added, I'm a light sleeper. Call out if you need anything. With that, he climbed the ladder to the loft, his bulk moving with surprising grace. Moments later, the lantern dimmed as he extinguished it, leaving only the fire's glow to paint the cabin in hues of gold and shadow. Sarah helped Caleb shed his snow-stiffened coat, using a quilt's edge to wipe his face clean. She tucked him into the pallet, sliding in beside him. His small body curled against hers, seeking warmth and safety. As the fire's heat and the stew's fullness lulled him, his tension eased. Is this the prairie lands? He whispered drowsily in Cheyenne. Sarah pressed her lips to his forehead. No, my heart. But it's a safe harbor for now. The man with the sky-blue eyes, Caleb murmured. Is he a good spirit or a bad one? Sarah weighed her response. Neither, she decided. He's just a man, and men choose each day whether to walk in light or shadow. Caleb nodded, content, his eyelids drooping. Today he chose light, he said before sleep claimed him. Sarah lay awake, her ankle throbbing, a relentless reminder of their brush with death. Above, the loft's planks creaked as Ethan shifted. Was he, too, lying awake, pondering the strangers he'd welcomed into his sanctuary? Despite her bone-deep fatigue, sleep eluded her. Questions circled like vultures. How long would the storm rage? Could they linger until her ankle healed? And what then? The nearest Cheyenne settlement was a week's trek in fair weather, an impossible journey in winter's grip. And what of Clearwater's men? Would they hunt for survivors? The thought chilled her more than the mountain air. Her fitful sleep was haunted by dreams of flames and falling snow. Morning broke with a clarity that transformed the cabin. Sunlight streamed through the small windows, painting golden patches on the plank floor. The fire had dwindled to embers, but the cabin held its warmth. Sarah sat up cautiously, mindful of her ankle, which, though still swollen, ached less fiercely. Caleb slept on, his face peaceful in a way she hadn't seen since before the raid. Movement above signaled Ethan was awake. He descended the ladder with quiet efficiency, offering a nod when he saw her. Storm's broken, he said, moving to the stove. 3 feet of fresh snow, at least. We're not going anywhere for a while. The words settled between them, heavy with implication. They were stranded together, 3 strangers bound by necessity. Coffee, Ethan offered, measuring grounds into a dented pot. Please, Sarah accepted, though coffee was a rare luxury in her village, tasted only during trade with settlers. Ethan worked methodically, stoking the stove, boiling water, mixing batter for what looked like cornbread, a staple of frontier mornings. His movement spoke of long practice, a life shaped by routine and solitude. You said this is your ranch, Sarah ventured, keeping her voice low to avoid waking Caleb. I saw no livestock. A muscle twitched in Ethan's jaw, his hands pausing briefly. Lost most of my herd in an early blizzard, he said after a moment. Sold the rest before winter locked in. This cabin's all I've got now. There was a story there, Sarah sensed, but she didn't press. Loss was a universal language, and privacy a courtesy even in close quarters. We'll leave as soon as my ankle allows, she said instead. We'll find our people. Ethan glanced over his shoulder, his expression unreadable. Your village. It's gone, Sarah's throat tightened. Burned. Men from a town called Clearwater. Something flickered in Ethan's eyes, recognition perhaps or unease. Clearwater's the nearest settlement, he said slowly. 15 miles east, longer by trail. I used to trade there before the snows. They are a tight-knit bunch, opinions tighter than their community. His words were careful, neither condemning nor defending the town. Sarah wondered where his loyalties lay if pushed. Caleb stirred, his eyes blinking open to the unfamiliar surroundings. Confusion gave way to memory, and he sat up, alert despite the comfort of the pallet. "Morning, young man," Ethan said, his tone gentler. "Hungry?" Caleb looked to Sarah, who nodded encouragingly. "Yes, sir," he replied cautiously. Ethan's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "Just Ethan. Sir was my pa, and a meaner cuss never roamed these peaks." He brought plates of cornbread drizzled with molasses, a frontier treat that made Sarah wonder about this solitary rancher and his unexpected stores in the heart of winter. The coffee, when it came, was strong and bitter, warming her from within. After breakfast, Ethan tended Sarah's ankle with surprising skill, washing it gently before applying a poultice of yarrow and comfrey, bound with clean linen strips. "Where'd you learn this?" she asked. "My ma," he replied, eyes on his work. "She was a healer back in Kentucky, knew every herb and remedy." "She taught you well," Sarah said. A shadow crossed his face. "I wasn't always the best pupil," he admitted, his voice low. The day set a rhythm that would define their first week. Ethan handled chores, hauling firewood from a covered stack, checking trap lines in the nearby woods, melting snow for water. Sarah, confined by her injury, took to preparing meals from Ethan's surprisingly varied provisions. Caleb, initially reserved, began exploring the cabin, his fingers tracing the contours of tools and trinkets. Ethan didn't mind, occasionally pausing to explain a chisel's purpose or the tale behind a carved wooden eagle, a gift from his father, a trapper who'd roamed the Rockies before settling. On the third day, Sarah discovered a shelf of books in a corner, a dozen volumes with cracked spines that whispered of frequent use. She traced titles: Hawthorne's The Scarlet Letter, a worn Bible, a collection of Longfellow's poems, remnants of a world her father had urged her to understand. "You read?" Ethan asked, catching her interest as he entered with an armload of firewood. "Some," Sarah admitted. Her father, a pragmatist, had traded pelts for lessons from a missionary, believing literacy was a shield in a changing world. "My ma insisted on books," Ethan said. "Said the mind starves without 'em, same as the body. Take what you like." That evening, with Caleb asleep, Sarah opened Longfellow's Evangeline, its lines glowing in the firelight. Across the room, Ethan cleaned his rifle, the steady rhythm a counterpoint to the quiet. It was their first moment of shared stillness, free from survival's urgent demands. "Why did you help us?" Sarah asked suddenly, the question breaking free after days of silent wondering. Ethan's hands stilled on the rifle. He didn't look up, but his profile betrayed careful thought. "6 years back," he said finally, "my wife and daughter got caught in a blizzard coming home from Clearwater. They didn't make it. Found him in spring, half a mile from here." The words landed like stones in still water, rippling with unspoken pain. Sarah thought of Caleb, of how close they'd come to the same fate, of how Ethan must have seen his own ghosts in their plight. "I'm sorry," she said softly. He nodded, an acknowledgement, not acceptance. "No one should die alone in the cold," he said, resuming his work. "Not when a hand could save him." The hunter's shadow. The days in Ethan Caldwell's cabin wove a fragile rhythm, marked by the slow mending of Sarah Red Willow's ankle and a cautious easing of the walls between three souls thrown together by fate. Ethan proved a man of few words but steady deeds, keeping the water bucket filled, crafting a pine branch crutch for Sarah when she tested her weight, teaching Caleb to set rabbit snares with the patience of a frontier mentor. A week into their stay, Ethan returned from his trap lines with a burlap bundle, his blue eyes glinting with quiet purpose. "Thought this might interest you," he said, setting it on the table. Inside were wintergreen leaves, pine needles, and birch bark, remedies Sarah had feared she'd lack. "You know Cheyenne healing?" she asked, surprised. Ethan shook his head. "Just what grows where. Figured you'd know the rest." The gesture struck deeper than Sarah expected. Providing food and shelter was one thing. Anticipating unspoken needs was another, a bridge between their worlds. That evening, she taught Caleb to grind the herbs, passing on tribal knowledge as she would have in their village. Ethan watched from his fireside chair, whittling a pine block into a toy buffalo, his questions revealing a curiosity rooted in respect. "My granddad said the Cheyenne were the finest healers west of the Mississippi," he remarked. "Knew plants like a preacher knows scripture." Sarah glanced up. "You know our people," Ethan nodded. "My pa trapped with the Arapaho before settling here. Spoke their tongue better than English, Ma used to say." A rare smile flickered. Clear water never quite warmed to him. The revelation painted Ethan in new light. Not just a solitary rancher, but a man shaped by the frontier's blurred edges, where cultures met and sometimes mingled. As Sarah's ankle strengthened, she joined the cabin's routines, mending Ethan's work shirts, rendering tallow into soap using his mother's recipe, weaving baskets from pine roots Caleb proudly gathered. A quiet harmony bloomed, three solitary hearts finding solace in shared labor and fireside evenings, where Caleb's laughter rang like a bell in a silent valley. Yet beneath this calm, Sarah knew their refuge was temporary. The snow would melt, choices would loom, and Clearwater's shadow lingered. She stood at the cabin window one afternoon, watching Caleb help Ethan clear a path to the firewood shed. The boy's giggles carried through the glass, a sound she'd feared lost forever after the village burned. Caleb was thriving, his solemn nature giving way to confidence under Ethan's steady guidance. Would that fade if they rejoined their tribe? Would the survivor's grief dim his newfound light? And yet what choice was there? They couldn't burden Ethan indefinitely, nor survive alone. Her thoughts shattered at a sound that froze her blood, the distant baying of hounds, their eager yips slicing through the mountain air. Hunting dogs, and in these peaks, only one quarry justified such a chase. Ethan heard it too, his head snapping up, body tensing like a bowstring. Without a word, he scooped Caleb into his arms and strode toward the cabin, his face grim as a storm cloud. "Inside," he barked, setting Caleb down at the door. "Now," Sarah's heart pounded as Ethan grabbed the rifle from its peg. "Clearwater men?" she asked, already knowing. Ethan nodded, checking the rifle's load with practiced hands. "Hunting party. They don't usually come this far west. They are after survivors." Sarah pulled Caleb close, his small frame trembling. He was old enough to grasp the danger, too young to hide his fear. Ethan's gaze flicked to the boy, then hardened with resolve. "Get your things," he said quietly. "There's a root cellar under the bare rug, trapdoors hidden." Sarah's breath caught. "You'd hide us," Ethan's expression darkened. "What they did to your village wasn't justice. It was murder. I want to bet more of it." He moved to the window, peering at the tree line. The baying grew louder, the dog's excitement signaling a fresh scent. Time was slipping away. "Go," Ethan urged. Sarah hesitated only a moment before pulling back the rug, revealing the trapdoor. Cool, earthy air wafted from below. She helped Caleb down the rough steps, then paused, looking back at the rancher who'd saved them twice. "Ethan," she said, his name unfamiliar yet heavy on her tongue. "Thank you." He met her gaze, something unreadable passing between them, then nodded sharply and turned to the window, where the first silhouettes of men and dogs emerged from the forest. Sarah descended into the root cellar, pulling the trapdoor shut. Darkness enveloped them, broken only by slivers of light seeping through the floorboards. She gathered Caleb close, his heartbeat a frantic drum against her chest. Above, Ethan's boots creaked as he prepared to face the intruders. The cellar smelled of damp soil and stored harvests, wrinkled potatoes, braided onions, jars of preserves lining crude shelves. They huddled in the farthest corner, the world above a distant battleground. The cabin door creaked open, a gust of cold air sweeping across the floorboards before it slammed shut. "Caldwell," a voice greeted, muffled but sharp with authority. "Thompson," Sarah guessed, a Clearwater man with a reputation for ruthlessness. "You're a long way from town," Ethan replied, his tone even, like a man discussing the weather over a saloon bar. Shuffling boots and the stamp of snow suggested multiple men crowding the small space. "Tracking some Indians," another voice said, higher-pitched, eager. "Whitaker, perhaps. Dogs caught their scent heading this way." "Is that so?" Ethan's voice remained calm, unshaken. A metallic clink suggested he was at the stove. "Coffee?" A pause, then murmurs of agreement. Sarah could envision Ethan, deliberate as a poker player, setting water to boil while the hunters scanned for signs of their prey. "Seen any sign of him?" Thompson asked, direct as a rifle shot. "Cheyenne woman and child, we reckon. That's specific," Ethan observed mildly. "Usually you boys just say Indians and call it a day." A scoff. "These are survivors from that den up by Eagle Pass," Whitaker said. "The village you burned," Ethan stated, not a question but a blade, sharp and unyielding. Silence stretched, taut as a bowstring. "That was justice," a third voice growled, Baxter deeper, commanding. "They rustled Jensen's cattle twice this winter. Killed his boy when he tried to stop him." Sarah's breath hitched. A lie brazen and vile. Her people had never touched settlers' herds, never harmed their children. But who lived to refute it? "Funny," Ethan said, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. "Last I heard, Jensen's boy died of diphtheria before the snows. Tragic but not murder. You calling me a liar, Caldwell?" Baxter's tone turned hostile. "Just repeating what I heard in town," Ethan countered, unruffled. "Don't get much news out here alone." The tension radiated through the floorboards, a storm brewing in the cabin above. Sarah held Caleb tighter, sensing the knife-edge moment. One wrong word, and blood would spill, Ethan's, then theirs. "Coffee's ready," Ethan announced, the mundane words cutting through the hostility like a plow through frozen earth. Mugs scraped, boots shuffled, the offer of hospitality momentarily diffusing the standoff. "About those Indians," Thompson pressed. "Dogs tracked them near your door. Storm scrambles scents," Ethan said dismissively. "I've seen those mutts chase their own tails after a fresh snow." "Even so," Baxter challenged, "mind if we look around?" Ethan's tone hardened. "My home ain't a public square, Baxter. Never has been." "You protecting something, Caldwell?" A loaded pause. Sarah could almost see Ethan's calculating gaze. "Just my privacy," he said finally, "and the sanctity of my hearth, which you were mighty vocal about last spring when the mayor wanted to tax our whiskey stills." A grudging chuckle from Whitaker broke the stalemate. "He's got you there, Baxter. Can't have it both ways." Ethan seized the moment, his voice softening, almost conciliatory. "Haven't seen any Cheyenne, but I found tracks yesterday, heading northwest toward the high pass. If your quarry's got sense, they're aiming for the Arapaho settlements beyond the ridge." In this weather, Thompson sounded skeptical. "With a kid, desperation makes fools of us all," Ethan said softly, a subtle rebuke in his tone. The atmosphere shifted, the hunters' resolve wavering. "We should move before sundown," Baxter decided. "Caldwell, you do well to report any sightings." These Indians are dangerous, whatever you think of our methods. I'll keep that in mind, Ethan replied, noncommittal. Boots scuffed toward the door. Strange life you've carved out here, Thompson remarked. Man needs company in winter. I've got all I need, Ethan said, the door creaking open. Your wife and girls' graves don't count, Baxter shot back, cruel from the safety of the threshold. The living need the living, Caldwell. Remember that when the wind keeps you awake. The door slammed shut. Sarah and Caleb held their breath as footsteps circled the cabin once, then crunched away. The hounds' baying resumed, fading toward the northwest path Ethan had suggested. They waited, minutes stretching like hours, until the trapdoor lifted, flooding the cellar with light. Ethan's bearded face appeared, grave but steady. They're gone, he said, offering a hand. For now. Sarah emerged, then lifted Caleb from the dark. The boy blinked in the brightness, pale but composed. Silence hung heavy, the weight of Ethan's risk, a defiance of Clearwater's wrath, binding them like an unspoken oath. They lied, Caleb said suddenly, his child's clarity cutting through the tension. About the cattle, the boy. Ethan nodded, meeting Caleb's gaze with respect. They did. Why? Caleb pressed, confusion creasing his brow. Why lie if they were right to attack us? Ethan glanced at Sarah, seeking permission to answer. She nodded, trusting him with the truth her son deserved. Crouching to Caleb's level, Ethan spoke carefully. Men need to believe they're right, even when they're wrong, especially then. It's easier to hate if you think your enemy deserves it. Caleb considered this, his dark eyes solemn. But you didn't believe them. No, Ethan said, a faint smile breaking through. I've lived long enough to know most folks, Cheyenne, settler or otherwise, want the same things. Peace, family, a full belly. Trouble comes from fear, not evil. The words, simple yet profound, touched Sarah deeply, their wisdom untainted by the bitterness Ethan's losses could have bred. You risked everything today, she said softly. If they'd found us. They didn't, Ethan cut in, standing. And they won't be back soon. That pass I sent em to is snowed until spring. They'll limp back to Clearwater empty-handed. Relief flooded Sarah, but with it came a stark realization. Their sanctuary wasn't as remote as she'd hoped. The world's hatred could breach even this haven. Perhaps we should leave, she suggested, though the thought of facing the wilderness again twisted her gut. Find another path to the Arapaho, Ethan's brow furrowed. With a half-healed ankle and 3 feet of snow. That's a death sentence, he shook his head. You're safer here till spring, at least. His certainty underscored their dependence on him, a stranger who'd become their shield. Why? Sarah echoed Caleb's earlier question. Why risk so much for us? Ethan's gaze drifted to the window, where fresh snow softened the hunter's tracks. Maybe I'm tired of being alone, he said, so quietly she strained to hear. Maybe I need to believe there's still good in this world, that not everything ends in loss. He turned back, his expression guarded. Does the reason matter? Before Sarah could answer, Caleb stepped forward, placing his small hand on Ethan's. Thank you, he said in careful English, the words deliberate and heartfelt. Something flickered in Ethan's eyes, surprise, or perhaps a buried warmth rekindled. He nodded. You're welcome, he replied, the phrase a covenant sealed in the firelight. In the days that followed, the cabin's dynamics shifted subtly but profoundly. The hunter's visit had forged allies from housemates, and now something deeper took root, tentative as spring's first buds. Ethan taught Caleb to read using his mother's books, dog-eared volumes of Hiawatha and frontier almanacs, marveling at the boy's quick mind. In return, Caleb shared Cheyenne tales of the trickster coyote, Ethan repeating the words with care, his tongue stumbling but earnest. Sarah joined these exchanges, correcting pronunciations, explaining traditions like the sun dance, laughing at Ethan's mangled attempts at Cheyenne phrases. His willingness to learn, to embrace rather than merely tolerate, disarmed her. "My pa used to say every language is a new lens on the world," Ethan remarked one evening by the fire, Caleb asleep nearby. He spoke Arapaho fluently, claimed it changed how he saw the stars. "Your father was wise," Sarah said, her fingers weaving a basket from pine roots. "Our words shape more than our tongues." Ethan nodded, thoughtful. "He'd have liked you both," he said after a pause, the simple words heavy with meaning, a recognition of connection beyond survival. As January bled into February, their routines merged. Ethan taught Sarah to shoot his rifle, insisting every frontier soul needed to hunt and defend. Her natural aim surprised them both. By her third lesson, she was hitting tin cans with sharpshooter precision. "You're a natural," Ethan observed, watching her reload. "Our peoples aren't so different," Sarah replied. "Survival demands skill, not just strength." Ethan's stern features softened, a rare almost smile. Wisdom my ma would have preached, though she'd have quoted Proverbs to make her point. A crossroads in the snow. The fragile harmony in Ethan Caldwell's cabin, nestled deep in the Rocky Mountains, was a hard-won refuge for Sarah Red Willow and her son Caleb. Yet, like all things forged in winter's crucible, it carried the weight of impermanence. Sarah's ankle healed, her strength returning with each day, but the specter of Clearwater loomed larger as February's snows began to soften. The hunters' visit had proven their sanctuary was not impregnable. Men like Baxter and Thompson would return, perhaps with the mayor's writ to scour every inch of Ethan's land. To stay was to court danger, not just for Sarah and Caleb, but for Ethan, whose defiance had already painted a target on his back. The decision came on a morning when the sun broke through the clouds, casting a rare golden glow across the cabin's plank floor. Sarah stood at the window, watching Caleb and Ethan mend a broken sled, their laughter mingling like notes in a frontier ballad. The boy had blossomed under Ethan's care, his cautious demeanor giving way to a confidence that reminded Sarah of his father in happier times. But this haven, this moment, was a borrowed dream. "We can't stay," she said quietly as Ethan entered, brushing snow from his coat. "Not with Clearwater's eyes turning this way." Ethan's face tightened, but he didn't argue. "Baxter's got a grudge thicker than a buffalo hide," he admitted. "He'll be back, and next time he won't settle for coffee and lies." He glanced at Caleb, still engrossed in the sled outside. "There's a man in Clearwater, Dr. Benjamin Harris. Old friend, trustworthy. He's got a place with a hidden room, built for folks needing to lie low. He'll shelter you till spring, help you find your people." Sarah's heart clenched at the thought of leaving, but Ethan's plan was sound. "And you?" she asked. "What happens when they find us gone and you alone?" "I've weathered worse storms," Ethan said, his voice steady but his eyes betraying a flicker of loss. "You and Caleb need safety. I can't give that here much longer." The words hung heavy, an acknowledgement of the fragile thread binding them. Sarah nodded, swallowing the ache in her throat. "We'll go to Dr. Harris," she agreed. "But this isn't the end, Ethan." It's a pause in the story we're still writing. His gaze softened, a rare warmth breaking through. "I'll hold you to that," he said, the words both vow and hope. Preparations were swift. Sarah and Caleb had few possessions beyond what Ethan had provided. A quilt, a carved wooden buffalo Ethan had whittled for Caleb, a pouch of herbs. Dr. Benjamin Harris arrived the next day, his weathered face kind but serious, his wagon loaded with supplies to mask the true purpose of his visit. "The story, if anyone asks," he said as he helped Sarah and Caleb aboard, is that you're my half-Arapaho cousin and her boy, heading to kin up north. Keeps things simple. Caleb clutched the wooden buffalo, his eyes fixed on Ethan. Keep this safe, he said, pressing it into Ethan's palm. Till I come back. Ethan closed his fingers around it, his throat working. I will, son, he promised. Along with everything else. Sarah's goodbye was harder, words tangling in her chest. She placed her hand over Ethan's, where it held the buffalo. Thank you, she said, the simple phrase carrying the weight of their shared winter. Survival, trust, something unspoken but growing. Ethan's free hand covered hers, warm and steady. Come back, he said, a plea wrapped in resolve. She nodded, unable to speak, then turned to let Dr. Harris help her into the wagon. Caleb nestled before her. As they rolled away, Sarah resisted looking back, fearing it would feel too final. Ethan stood alone, a solitary figure clutching a carved buffalo, his heart tethered to a hope he'd thought buried with his past. The Harris home stood on Clearwater's outskirts, a two-story clapboard house painted crisp white with sage-green shutters, half hidden by a grove of cottonwoods just budding with spring's promise. Unlike the town's clustered dwellings, it sat apart, a deliberate choice by Dr. Harris to balance accessibility for patients with the privacy needed for his family, and, as Sarah soon learned, for secrets. The front housed his surgery and dispensary, while the rear and upper floor were living quarters. But the true marvel was a hidden room on the second floor, invisible from outside. My father built it during the war, Margaret Harris explained, leading them up a staircase concealed behind a linen cupboard. He ran a stop on the Underground Railroad, guiding folks to freedom. Some secrets become family heirlooms. Margaret, her silver hair and sharp features hinting at Arapaho ancestry, smiled faintly. The hidden room was modest but cozy, lit by a single window angled to catch sunlight without betraying its existence. A bed, a small table with chairs, a washstand, and a bookshelf stuffed with worn volumes, Emerson Dickinson, a farmer's almanac, filled the space. A pot-bellied stove offered warmth and a place to cook. It's not a prairie palace, Margaret said, but it's safe. Only Benjamin, our boys, and our daughter in Denver know it exists. Caleb approached the window, peering at Clearwater's distant rooftops, church steeple and chimney smoke. This was the town that had raised his home, hunted him and his mother. Now it was their sanctuary, a paradox that tightened Sarah's chest. Thank you for this, Sarah said as Margaret filled a water pitcher. We'll keep to ourselves. Margaret set the pitcher down, her gaze direct like her husband's. My grandmother would have called you kin, she said. In her world, sheltering those in need was sacred, especially family. We're not family, Sarah said gently. Margaret's smile was knowing. Benjamin told me about Ethan, how he looks at you, how you look at him. How Caleb's laughter woke a house where joy died with Hannah and little Clara. She waved a hand. Maybe not blood kin yet, but kin all the same. Before Sarah could respond, footsteps on the hidden stairs announced Dr. Harris, carrying a tray of cornbread, cheese, and dried apples, their first meal in Clearwater. The boys are back home, he said, setting the tray down. Less suspicious that way. They'll spread word I'm tending a case in the foothills, explaining my absence today and any comings and goings. Is such caution needed? Sarah asked, watching Caleb eye the food. In your own home. Clearwater's got eyes sharper than a hawk's, Margaret said matter-of-factly. Small towns notice everything, strength and curse alike. Dr. Harris nodded. I've sent a message north with a trader I trust, asking about Cheyenne survivors who reached the Arapaho. It'll take time, but it's a start. He glanced at Sarah. Unless you've reconsidered Ethan's situation. I need time, Sarah said, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions. We both do. Of course, Margaret said, shooting her husband a look. No one should rush such choices. She turned to Caleb, deftly shifting gears. I hear you're learning to read, young man. I was a school teacher before marrying Benjamin. Shall we continue your lessons? Caleb looked to Sarah, his eyes bright despite the day's strain. At her nod, he smiled, a rare, unguarded joy. Yes, please, he said. Mr. Ethan was teaching me about buffalo in books. Said maybe I could ride a horse someday. The casual mention pierced Sarah's heart. Caleb hadn't shared this dream before, this glimpse of a future woven with Ethan during quiet moments she hadn't witnessed. How deep had their bond grown? Dr. Harris caught her reaction, his tone gentle. Ethan was born to be a father, like he was with Clara. It's his calling, I reckon, before fate stole it away. And a husband to Hannah, Sarah added, a trace of uncertainty in her voice. Grief, when it heals, doesn't shrink the heart, Dr. Harris said. It stretches it, or so Margaret's grandmother swore. Margaret nodded, her eyes softening. She'd have liked you, Sarah. Now eat, both of you. Tomorrow we'll sort the practicalities. After the Harrises left, Sarah sat beside Caleb on the narrow bed, watching him devour cornbread with a growing boy's hunger, too long accustomed to scraps. Are you all right here? She asked, smoothing his hair. It's different from Ethan's cabin, Caleb chewed thoughtfully. It's nice, but it's not home. It's waiting, Sarah smiled at his insight. Yes, waiting. We may be here weeks while Dr. Harris arranges our journey north. Or while you decide if we're going back to Ethan, Caleb said, his child's directness cutting through pretense. He set down an apple, serious. I want to go back. I know, Sarah said, choosing honesty. But it's complicated, Caleb. Ethan's a settler. We're Cheyenne. Our people may have survived. We might find them. Caleb's eyes, so like his father's, held hers. Ethan saved us. He taught me things. He made you smile again. Doesn't that make him our people too? The question, simple yet profound, caught Sarah off guard. To a boy who'd known both tribal bonds and the cabin's intimate refuge, the lines adults drew, us versus them, seemed arbitrary. It's not that simple, she tried. There'd be prejudice, like the men who burned our village. Not everyone's like them, Caleb countered. Dr. Harris isn't. Mrs. Harris isn't. Ethan isn't. Sarah pulled him close, his words echoing in her heart. That night in the unfamiliar bed, listening to Clearwater's distant hum, her thoughts drifted to Ethan's cabin, to the man standing alone, clutching a wooden buffalo and a promise. Meanwhile, in that cabin, Ethan sat by the dying fire, turning the carving over in his hands. The silence, once a familiar companion, now felt like a rebuke, as if the walls themselves mourned Sarah and Caleb's absence. But what choice had there been? Baxter would return, and a life in hiding was no life for a boy like Caleb, bright and brave, or for Sarah, whose spirit deserved sunlight, not shadows. He rose, resolve hardening, and crossed to a chest at his bed's foot. From it he drew a leather pouch, his meager savings, all that remained after a brutal winter culled his herd. It wasn't much, but it might suffice. Before dawn, he saddled his horse and rode toward Clearwater, circling west to appear as if coming from the high country, avoiding Baxter's prying eyes. He reached town as the general store, Clearwater Mercantile, opened its doors, its sign gleaming with fresh paint. The bell jingled, drawing Samuel Green, the storekeeper, from his shelves. "Ethan Caldwell," Samuel exclaimed. "Thought you turned to ice up there. What brings you?" Ethan forced a grin, aware his presence would spark gossip. "Takes more than snow to bury me, Sam. Been fixing storm damage, January winds tore my barn to splinters. A plausible excuse, and Samuel nodded, accepting it. What do you need? Got new axes, nails, good for rebuilding. Looking for something else, Ethan said, casual but deliberate. A ring if you've got any. Samuel's eyebrows shot up. A wedding ring. Ethan held his gaze. Something simple, gold if you have it. The storekeeper studied him, curiosity plain. Didn't know you were courting, Ethan. Plenty you don't know, Sam, Ethan replied evenly. Got what I need or not? Samuel raised his hands, placating. No offense, just surprised. He pulled a wooden box from beneath the counter, revealing half a dozen rings, modest but finely crafted for a frontier town. Ethan chose a narrow gold band etched with delicate sagebrush leaves, a nod to Sarah's bond with the land. The price nearly emptied his pouch, but some things outweighed coin. As Samuel wrapped the ring in cloth, he leaned in. Town's buzzing about those Indians tracked near your place in February. Baxter's sure some slipped the Eagle Pass raid. Ethan kept his face neutral. Is that so? Samuel nodded, handing over the box. He's rallying men for another search come spring. Got the mayor's blessing now. Most folks think he's chasing ghosts, but Baxter's got a mean streak. Watch yourself. The news, cloaked as gossip, was vital. Ethan pocketed the ring, adding flour, coffee, and seeds to his purchases, normal items to justify his trip. Anything else I should know? He asked. Samuel hesitated. Baxter's been mouthing off, saying you're soft on savages. Nonsense, but he holds grudges like a preacher holds scripture. Ethan thanked him, loaded his horse, and rode out, doubling back to avoid notice. The ring's small box pressed against his chest, a promise and a weight. In Clearwater, Sarah stood at the hidden room's window, watching the town stir. She'd visited settler outposts before, but never lingered, observing their rhythms like a ghost. Caleb sat with Margaret, engrossed in reading lessons, his quick mind impressing the former teacher. He could bridge worlds, Margaret had said, and the words lingered as Sarah pondered Caleb's future, caught between Cheyenne roots and a settler's world, a gift or a burden. A figure on horseback caught her eye, Ethan, riding out of town, his posture unmistakable. Her pulse quickened, confusion mingling with hope. Why was he here? She kept silent, watching him vanish beyond the town's edge. Later, Dr. Harris entered with breakfast and news. Word from my Arapaho contact, he said. About 20 Cheyenne reached their settlement before winter, mostly women, children, a few elders. Sarah's breath caught. Abigail, Harris shook his head. No names, just numbers. Runners memorize messages to avoid written proof. Hope and doubt collided. Her people lived, but was her sister among them? There's more, Harris added. It's safe to travel north in 2 weeks, when the trails firm up. Guides can meet you. 2 weeks, a deadline that made her choice stark, north to her people or back to Ethan. Also, Harris said, a glint in his eye, I saw Ethan in town buying supplies. And a gold ring, Sarah's heart stuttered. A ring, Margaret frowned. Benjamin, you shouldn't have. It's relevant, Harris said, unrepentant. A sagebrush-etched band, simple but pretty. Ethan's not impulsive, Sarah. If he bought it, he's sure. A promise in the spring. In the hidden room above Dr. Benjamin Harris's surgery in Clearwater, Sarah Red Willow stood at a crossroads, the weight of a gold ring's promise pressing against her heart. The news of Ethan Caldwell's purchase, a slender band etched with sagebrush leaves, had upended her carefully guarded resolve. It was not just a token but a declaration, a vision of a life that defied the chasm between their worlds. Yet the message from the Arapaho settlement, confirming that some Cheyenne had survived, pulled her northward with equal force. Her sister Abigail and her nephew might be among the 20 souls who'd reached safety. To build a future without knowing their fate was to betray the blood ties that had anchored her through the darkest winter. 2 weeks remained before the trails would be firm enough for travel, a fleeting window to weigh a choice that would shape not just her life but Caleb's. Each night, as Clearwater settled into sleep beyond the hidden window, Sarah lay beside her son, listening to his steady breaths and wrestling with questions that had no easy answers. Could she return to Ethan, blending her Cheyenne heritage with a settler's life, facing prejudice that might shadow Caleb's path? Or should she rejoin her people, preserving their traditions but risking the joy she'd glimpsed in the cabin's firelight? Caleb's words echoed in her mind. Doesn't that make him our people too? His child's logic cut through adult complexities, suggesting a bridge where she saw only divides. Margaret Harris, with her schoolteacher's wisdom and Arapaho roots, became a quiet confidante. Over reading lessons with Caleb, she shared stories of her grandmother, who'd navigated a mixed heritage in a world that demanded conformity. "She taught me that love doesn't erase who you are," Margaret said one afternoon, her hands kneading dough for soda bread, a frontier staple. "It adds to it, like rivers joining without losing their currents." Sarah nodded, her fingers tracing the wooden box holding Ethan's ring, tucked safely in her pocket. "But what of duty?" she asked. "My sister, my people, they may need me." Margaret's eyes, sharp as a prairie hawk's, softened. "Duty is a guide, not a chain. Your heart knows the path, even if your mind's still mapping it." Caleb, meanwhile, thrived in the hidden room, his quick mind soaking up Margaret's lessons, poems by Whitman, arithmetic, tales of Lewis and Clark's expeditions. Yet his heart remained tethered to Ethan. "When we go back," he'd say, not if, recounting how Ethan had promised to teach him to ride a real horse, not just carve one from pine. His certainty, both touching and daunting, pressed Sarah to consider not just her own desires, but the future her son deserved, a life where his Cheyenne spirit could soar alongside the skills he'd need in a changing West. Dr. Harris's updates fueled her urgency. "The Arapaho guides will meet you at Hunter's Rock in 14 days, he confirmed, his voice steady but his eyes searching. "But Ethan's ring means he's made his choice, Sarah. Yours is still yours to make," Margaret, ever the pragmatist, added. "A woman's decision must be free, not swayed by a man's hopes, no matter how noble." Sarah turned to Caleb, who listened with a focus beyond his years. "What do you think, my son?" she asked. "North to our people, or back to Ethan's family?" Caleb didn't waver. "I want to be Ethan's family," he said. "But I want to know if Aunt Abigail's alive." His brow furrowed, grappling with the complexity. "Can't we do both?" The question, so simple yet profound, illuminated a path Sarah hadn't dared envision. "Perhaps," she said slowly, the idea taking root like a spring seedling. "We could go north, find Abigail, ensure our people know we live. Then if they're safe, if they don't need us," she paused, the words exhilarating and terrifying. "We could return to Ethan, if that's what we both want." Dr. Harris nodded, a rare smile creasing his face. "A wise compromise, balancing past and future." Margaret agreed, her voice warm. "Your grandmother would approve, Sarah. Honor your roots, embrace what's ahead, and choose your own trail." The plan crystallized, a delicate dance between duty and desire, but it hinged on the unknown, Abigail's fate, the Cheyenne survivor's needs, and whether Ethan's offer would hold through the months ahead. The appointed day dawned clear, a Colorado spring morning vibrant with promise and heavy with consequence. Sarah stood before a small mirror in the hidden room, studying her reflection. Margaret had provided settler clothing to blend in, a brown homespun dress, a wool shawl, boots that pinched but suited muddy trails. Her hair, braided and coiled, mimicked settler women's styles, though her dark, watchful eyes remained unmistakably Cheyenne, carrying memories of a village lost to flames. Caleb fidgeted in a stiff shirt and trousers, his long hair trimmed shorter but still defiantly Cheyenne. "Are you ready?" Sarah asked in their language, a private moment before they stepped into a world demanding disguise. Caleb nodded, solemn. "Will Ethan meet us before we go?" His priority was clear, not the journey but the man who'd become his anchor. "Doctor Harris sent word," Sarah confirmed, adjusting her shawl. "He'll meet us at Dawn Creek, away from town, where it's safe." Relief brightened Caleb's face, a spark of the boy who'd laughed in Ethan's cabin. Margaret entered with a bundle of provisions: soda, bread, jerky, cheese, enough for 3 days to reach the Arapaho guides. "You look the part," she said, approving their disguises. "Benjamin's ready with the wagon. We'll slip out the back trail before Clearwater wakes." The back trail, another Harris family secret, wound through cottonwoods, emerging far from town. Dr. Harris waited with a covered wagon, his expression a mix of calm and concern. "If anyone asks, you're my half-Arapaho cousin heading north to kin," he reminded them, helping Sarah and Caleb aboard. Margaret embraced Sarah warmly. "Whatever you choose, you have friends in Clearwater," she whispered. "Not just us, but others who'd stand against hate if given a chance." The farewell was brief, urgency outweighing sentiment. As the wagon pulled away, Sarah felt a dual pull: relief at escaping Clearwater's shadow, regret at leaving the Harrises, whose kindness had rewritten her view of settlers. The journey to Dawn Creek spanned the morning, following winding trails Dr. Harris chose for discretion and ease. Spring transformed the Rockies, wildflowers dusted hillsides, aspens shimmered with new leaves, streams roared with snowmelt. Caleb watched with wide eyes, pointing out a red-tailed hawk or a mule deer vanishing into the brush. His excitement surged as the wagon neared Dawn Creek, its burbling audible through the pines. There at the rendezvous stood Ethan Caldwell, dressed with care, beard trimmed, shirt clean, his stance a mix of eagerness and uncertainty. Beside him 2 horses were tethered, his sturdy roan and a dappled mare, gentle-looking, new to Sarah's eyes. Dr. Harris halted the wagon, greeting Ethan with a clasp of hands. "Right on time," he said. "Any trouble?" Ethan shook his head. Quiet as a Sunday sermon, his gaze shifted to Sarah and Caleb, softening like dawn over the plains. "You look well," he said simply. Before Sarah could respond, Caleb scrambled from the wagon and ran to Ethan, throwing himself into the rancher's arms. Ethan crouched, steadying the boy with a gentleness that tightened Sarah's throat. "I kept your buffalo safe," he told Caleb, patting the carving in his pocket. "Like I promised." "And I practiced reading," Caleb said earnestly. "Mrs. Harris says I'm good." "No doubt," Ethan replied, his smile transforming his stern features. He glanced at Sarah, then back to Caleb. "Got something to show you." He led the boy to the mare, her white blaze gleaming. Dr. Harris helped Sarah down, murmuring, "He bought that mare from Old Man Winters. Gentle as a lamb, trained for kids." "Cost nearly as much as the ring." Sarah's chest constricted. "For Caleb," Harris nodded, leaving the implication unspoken, a gift for parting or a hope for return. Ethan lifted Caleb onto the mare's back, teaching him to hold the reins, his instructions patient as a father's. Caleb sat tall, his face alight with pride. "I'll give you privacy," Dr. Harris said, leading his wagon downstream to water the horses. Back in an hour, alone with Ethan and Caleb, Sarah approached, her boots crunching on creekside gravel. Ethan turned, and for a moment they simply stood, a Cheyenne woman and a settler man, bound by a winter's worth of shared survival. Her name's Sage, Ethan said, nodding to the mare. Likes to nibble sagebrush when she gets a chance. She's beautiful, Sarah said. Caleb looks born to ride. He is, Ethan agreed, watching the boy guide Sage in a small circle, his focus absolute. Silence fell, heavy with unspoken truths. Ethan reached into his pocket, pulling out a small wooden box that caught the sunlight. I want you to have this, he said, offering it. Before you go north, so you know where I stand, whatever you decide. Sarah took the box, its polished surface warm from his body. Inside, the gold ring gleamed, its sagebrush etching a quiet ode to the land they both loved. It reminded me of you, Ethan said, watching her. Strong, rooted, but shaped to endure. Sarah closed the box gently, not rejecting but holding the moment's weight. Ethan, she began, searching for words to match the magnitude of their crossroads. I need to know if Abigail survived, if her son lives. I can't build a future without settling the past. Can you understand? His gaze held steady, no trace of the disappointment he must feel. I'd think less of you if you didn't, he said. Family's family, Sarah. I'd never ask you to choose between your blood and what might be with us. Relief washed through her, his understanding a stark contrast to the settlers who demanded she forsake her heritage. The Arapaho guides will take us to their settlement, she explained. If Abigail's there, I'll see she's safe, explain why I'd return south. Return south, Ethan repeated, testing the words. Then you've decided. Sarah glanced at Caleb, now confidently circling on Sage. Caleb has, she said softly. He speaks of nothing but coming back to you. She paused, summoning courage. And I find myself looking forward, imagining a life I never thought possible. Ethan's expression remained guarded, hope wrestling with caution. What life? He asked. Sarah met his eyes. If we return, would Caleb be free to know his Cheyenne ways, to speak our tongue, to honor his father's people? I'd have it no other way, Ethan said without hesitation. What's the point of asking a boy, or anyone, to carve away their soul to fit someone else's mold? His voice grew firm. I don't want to change you, Sarah or Caleb. I want to build something new together, that respects where we've been and where we're going. His sincerity resonated, a vision of partnership, not compromise. Clearwater's talk, she pressed, needing certainty. The prejudice we'd face, Ethan's jaw tightened. Some'll wag their tongues no matter what. Others'll come around when they see we're just living, hurting no one. And those who can't, he shrugged. Their small minds are their own jail, doctor. Harris mentioned a story, Sarah noted. Me as half Arapaho, half French. Only if it keeps you safe, Ethan clarified. In our home, you'd be you, Caleb, too. No lies, no hiding. Kids shouldn't have to pretend to please folks. Neither should the woman I hope to marry. The directness of his intent, not a proposal but a clear stake in the ground, caught Sarah off guard. She'd known the ring's meaning, but hearing it spoken made it real, vivid as a prairie sunrise. Ethan, she said softly, I can't promise until I know Abigail's fate, until I've honored my people. She held up the box. But I'll keep this safe. And if you still want us when I return, I'll have an answer. It wasn't the vow he hoped for, but it was honest, a bridge to a future yet unwritten. Ethan nodded, a half-smile softening his face. The cabin's a mess without you anyway, he said, a rare humor that broke the tension. Sarah smiled, a lightness rising despite the journey ahead. Caleb rejoined them, leading Sage carefully. Mr. Ethan says Sage'll wait for me at the cabin, he announced, certain of their return. I can ride her every day when we live there. Sarah and Ethan exchanged a glance over the boy's head, his certainty both heartwarming and heavy. What if the Arapaho settlement demanded they stay? What if Abigail needed her? Sage'll be ready, Ethan assured Caleb, crouching to his level. When you come back, she's yours. That's a promise. Caleb nodded, sealing the covenant with a gravity beyond his years. For the next quarter hour, Sarah watched Caleb demonstrate his riding skills, Ethan at her side, close but not touching, honoring the boundaries she'd set. "You've been good for him," she said quietly. "He's more confident than I've seen since the village burned." "He's a fine boy," Ethan replied. "Quick, brave, eager. He deserves a future where that's valued, not punished." The words carried a deeper truth. In a West growing hostile to native peoples, Caleb's mixed path would need both his mother's heritage and a father's protection. Ethan's offer, unspoken but clear. The hour passed too swiftly. Dr. Harris returned, his expression respectful but urgent. "The Arapaho guides expect you at Hunter's Rock by nightfall," he reminded them. "We should move soon." Sarah tucked the ring's box into her dress, its weight a steadying force. Farewells were brief, but laden with emotion. Ethan lifted Caleb from Sage, accepting the boy's hug with visible feeling. "Remember the stars," he said, voice rough. "They'll guide you home if you're lost." "The North Star stays still," Caleb recited. "Like our cabin while we're gone." Ethan ruffled his hair, smiling. "That's right, son. Some things hold fast, no matter how far you roam." Turning to Sarah, words failed Ethan. They stood, the spring breeze carrying scents of sage and possibility. "I'll be here," he said finally. "Whatever you decide." Sarah nodded, then, in a moment of courage, leaned forward, pressing her lips to his, a brief, gentle kiss, a promise of what might be. Before he could respond, she turned, letting Dr. Harris help her onto the wagon beside Caleb. As they rolled north, Sarah didn't look back, her resolve too fragile to risk. Caleb waved until Ethan faded from view, then turned to her, serious beyond his years. "We'll come back, won't we?" Sarah drew him close, her cheek against his hair. "We'll try," she promised. "First, we find Aunt Abigail, honor our people. But if they are safe, if they don't need us, we'll try to return." Caleb settled against her, trusting her balance of heritage and hope. As the wagon pressed north, spring bursting in a riot of green, Sarah's thoughts lingered on the cabin, on the man waiting with a carved buffalo and a gold ring, a future neither could have dreamed before a winter storm wove their paths together. The box pressed against her hip, its gold catching the sunlight filtering through the aspens. Warmth, possibility, a choice awaiting her answer. Out there in the unfolding west, a Cheyenne mother and her son rode toward their past, carrying a hope that could bridge worlds, forging a story not of endings, but of beginnings yet to be written. The trail home. The journey north to Hunter's Rock unfolded under a Colorado sky, so vast it seemed to hold both promise and judgment. Sarah read Willow and Caleb rode in Dr. Benjamin Harris's wagon, the spring landscape a vivid contrast to the winter that had nearly claimed them. Aspens shimmered with new leaves, their whispers mingling with the rush of snowmelt streams, while prairie larks sang hymns of renewal. Caleb, nestled against Sarah, clutched a small pouch of sagebrush leaves, a gift from Ethan Caldwell, tucked alongside the wooden box holding the gold ring. Each jolt of the wagon pressed the box against Sarah's hip, a reminder of the choice awaiting her beyond the horizon. At Hunter's Rock, a jagged outcrop sacred to the Arapaho, two guides awaited, tall men with weathered faces and eyes that held the wisdom of the plains. They greeted Sarah in their tongue, their words a bridge to her Cheyenne roots, and offered a pair of sturdy ponies for the journey to their settlement. Dr. Harris clasped Sarah's hand, his voice low. "Whatever you find, you've got a friend in Clearwater." "Right when you're settled." Caleb hugged him fiercely, a boy's gratitude unspoken but profound. As the wagon turned south, Sarah felt a pang, not just for the hay-rises but for the cabin left behind, where a man waited with a carved buffalo and a heart laid bare. The Arapaho settlement, nestled in a valley cradled by the Rockies, was a tapestry of hide lodges and communal fires, alive with the resilience of those who'd endured. The guides led Sarah and Caleb to the council lodge, where an elder woman, her braids streaked with silver, confirmed the news. 20 Cheyenne had reached them before winter's grip tightened. "Your people are strong," she said, her voice like the wind over sage. "They mourn, but they rebuild." Sarah's heart raced as she asked, "Abigail Red Willow?" Her infant son, the elder's eyes softened with sorrow. "Abigail lives, but her boy did not survive the cold. She grieves, yet she is whole, cared for among us." The words struck like a stone, grief and relief entwined. Sarah found Abigail in a lodge near the river, her sister's face thinner, etched with loss, but her spirit unbroken. They embraced, tears mingling as they spoke of the village, the raid, and the miracles that had spared them. Abigail listened, wide-eyed, as Sarah recounted their winter with Ethan, the rancher who'd risked all to save them, the ring that waited, the life it promised. "He sounds like a man of honor," Abigail said, her voice steady despite her pain. "Our people will heal here, sister. But your heart, it pulls elsewhere. Go where it leads." Caleb, meanwhile, found kinship among the Cheyenne children, their games and stories rekindling his roots. Yet when Sarah spoke of staying, his eyes clouded. "What about Ethan?" he asked, his small hand clutching the sagebrush pouch. "He's waiting for us." The question, echoing his earlier plea, forced Sarah to confront her truth. The Arapaho offered safety, tradition, a return to the life she'd known. But Ethan offered something new, a partnership where Cheyenne and settler could weave a future, where Caleb could grow with both his heritage and the tools to navigate a changing West. Days turned to weeks in the settlement, Sarah helping with healing herbs, Caleb learning Arapaho songs. Yet the ring's weight grew heavier, its sagebrush etching a call to the south. One evening, as the North Star gleamed above the lodge, Sarah made her choice. "We'll return to Ethan," she told Caleb, her voice firm with resolve. "Abigail is safe, our people endure. Our path lies with the man who saw us through the storm." Caleb's face lit up, brighter than the firelight, his certainty a beacon for her own. The journey back was lighter, the ponies swift under a summer sky. When they reached Dawn Creek, Ethan stood waiting, his roan and sage tethered nearby. His eyes, that startling prairie sky blue, widened at the sight of them, hope breaking through his guarded stance. Caleb ran to him, and Ethan lifted the boy, spinning him as laughter rang out, a sound to rival the creek's song. Sarah approached, the ring's box in her hand, now open to reveal the gold band gleaming in the sunlight. "I found my sister," she said, her voice steady. "She's safe, but her son is gone. Our people will thrive without us." She held out the ring, not placing it on her finger but offering it back as a question. "If your heart still wants us, Ethan, my answer is yes." Ethan's breath caught, his hand closing over hers, the ring between them. "My heart hasn't changed," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "It's yours, Sarah, yours and Caleb's for as long as you'll have me." He slipped the ring onto her finger. Its sagebrush leaves a vow of roots and resilience. Caleb whooped, tugging Sage's reins, already dreaming of rides across the ranch. As they walked toward the cabin, Ethan's arm around Sarah, Caleb leading Sage, the Rockies stood sentinel, their peaks softened by summer's glow. The West was a land of harsh winters and fragile springs, of divisions and dreams. But in that moment, three souls, Cheyenne, settler, and the boy who bound them, forged a new story, one of love that bridged worlds, of a family born not of blood alone, but of choice, courage, and a winter that had tried to break them but instead made them whole. A new dawn on the frontier. Summer draped the Rocky Mountains in a quilt of wildflowers and sagebrush, the air humming with the promise of a new season. On Ethan Caldwell's ranch, nestled in a valley where the peaks stood like silent guardians, Sarah Red Willow and her son Caleb began a life that was both a homecoming and a bold leap into the unknown. The gold ring on Sarah's finger, etched with sagebrush leaves, gleamed as a covenant, not just of love, but of a shared vision to forge a family from two worlds. Yet as the sun rose over the cabin, casting long shadows across the rebuilt barn, the specter of Clearwater's prejudice loomed, a storm cloud on the horizon. The first weeks were a whirlwind of labor and laughter. Ethan, with Caleb's eager help, repaired fences torn by winter's wrath, their hammers ringing like a blacksmith's anthem. Sarah transformed the cabin, weaving Cheyenne patterns into quilts and hanging dried herbs that filled the air with the scent of the plains. Caleb, now 8, rode sage daily, his small frame growing bolder with each canter, his laughter a melody that seemed to coax the valley itself into bloom. "Look, Mama," he called one morning, guiding Sage in a tight circle, Ethan steadying the reins. "I'm a Cheyenne warrior on the hunt." Sarah smiled, her heart swelling, but her eyes caught Ethan's, a shared understanding that this joy was fragile, tethered to a world that might not accept their union. Ethan had warned her of Clearwater's narrow hearts, and the truth came swiftly. A trip to the general store for supplies drew whispers and sidelong glances. Samuel Green, the storekeeper, was cordial, but others, men like Baxter, whose grudge burned hotter than a branding iron, muttered about savages and traitors. Sarah held her head high, her Cheyenne pride a shield, but Caleb's question stung. "Why do they stare, Mama?" he asked, clutching a sack of cornmeal. "Because they fear what they don't know," she said, her voice steady. "But we'll show them who we are by living true." Ethan, ever the protector, stood firm. "Let 'em talk," he said, his blue eyes fierce as a summer storm. "We're building something real, land, family, a future. That's more than their gossip will ever amount to." His resolve was tested when Baxter and a handful of Clearwater men rode onto the ranch, claiming to check for stolen livestock. Ethan met them at the gate, rifle resting casually on his shoulder, his stance unyielding as a cottonwood. "No thieves here, Baxter," he said, voice low but edged with steel. "Unless you count those who'd burn a village and call it justice." Baxter's face reddened, but Dr. Benjamin Harris, who'd accompanied the group as a mediator, stepped forward. "No need for trouble," he said, his calm authority diffusing the tension. "Ethan's a good neighbor. Let's leave it at that." The men retreated, but Baxter's parting glare promised trouble. That evening by the fire, Sarah voiced her fear. "They'll come again, Ethan. Men like Baxter don't forgive." Ethan took her hand, the ring warm under his touch. "Then we'll face 'em together. This ranch is ours, yours, mine, Caleb's. No one's taking that." Life on the ranch found its rhythm, a blend of Cheyenne and settler ways. Sarah taught Caleb the stories of the trickster coyote, their Cheyenne words a secret song under the stars, while Ethan showed him how to track elk and mend a plow, skills of the frontier. Sunday evenings, they'd sit on the porch, Ethan reading aloud from The Last of the Mohicans, his voice weaving Cooper's tale into their own. Sarah added her own stories, of Cheyenne heroes who rode the plains, their courage a legacy for Caleb to carry. "You're both," she told him, "Cheyenne heart, frontier spirit. Never let anyone make you choose." Clearwater's resistance wasn't universal. Margaret Harris visited with baskets of preserves, her Arapaho heritage a quiet bond with Sarah. Other neighbors, like the widowed Mrs. Larson, whose son had died in a cattle stampede, warmed to Caleb's bright curiosity, offering him molasses cookies and tales of her own pioneer days. A barn dance at the Larson Ranch, lit by lanterns and alive with fiddle music, marked a turning point. Sarah, in a calico dress woven with Cheyenne beadwork, danced with Ethan, their steps a defiant harmony. Caleb spun with Mrs. Larson's granddaughter, his laughter drowning out the whispers of a few Clearwater hardliners. "They're seeing us," Ethan murmured, his arm around Sarah. Not as strangers, but as neighbors. Yet danger lingered. A late summer night brought hoofbeats and torchlight. Baxter and his men, emboldened by whiskey and the mayor's tacit approval, demanding to search the ranch for fugitives. Ethan barred the door, rifle in hand, while Sarah hid Caleb in the root cellar, her heart pounding as she whispered Cheyenne prayers. "This is my land," Ethan roared, his voice carrying the weight of a man who'd lost too much to yield. "You've got no claim here." Dr. Harris, alerted by a neighbor, arrived with a posse of fair-minded townsfolk, their presence forcing Baxter to retreat. "You're on borrowed time, Caldwell," Baxter spat, but the tide was shifting. Clearwater was not all hate. The crisis galvanized Sarah and Ethan. They doubled their efforts, planting crops and raising a small herd, their ranch a testament to resilience. Sarah began teaching Cheyenne healing to Margaret's daughter, visiting from Denver, weaving her heritage into the community. Caleb, now reading at a level beyond his years, wrote letters to Abigail, sent north with traders, keeping the Cheyenne bond alive. One crisp autumn evening, as the Rockies glowed with the last light of day, Ethan proposed a new venture, a school on the ranch, open to Cheyenne and settler children alike, a place where Caleb could learn both worlds without fear. Sarah stood on the porch, the sagebrush ring catching the sunset's fire. "A school," she mused, her voice thick with possibility. "A place where our stories, Cheyenne, settler, all of us, can live together." Ethan wrapped an arm around her, Caleb leaning against them, sage grazing nearby. "We're not just surviving anymore," Ethan said, his voice steady as the mountains. "We're building something that'll outlast us." Caleb looked up, his dark eyes bright. "Like the North Star," he said. "It stays still, and we keep going." The Rockies watched, their peaks eternal, as a family forged from winter's crucible carved a new path. Clearwater's prejudice would not vanish overnight, but each day, Sarah, Ethan, and Caleb proved that love could bridge divides, that courage could heal wounds, and that a home built on truth and resilience could stand against any storm. Their story, born in a brutal winter, was now a beacon, a promise that even in a divided West, two worlds could become one. The school on the ridge. Autumn painted the Rocky Mountains in hues of gold and crimson, the aspens ablaze against the granite peaks that cradled Ethan Caldwell's ranch. A year had passed since Sarah Red Willow and Caleb returned to the valley, their lives now woven into the land and each other, a family forged not just by love, but by the stubborn will to defy a divided West. The sagebrush-etched ring on Sarah's finger gleamed as a testament to their bond, but the ranch was more than a home. It was a beacon, a dream taking shape in the form of a school, a place where Cheyenne and settler children could learn side by side, their futures intertwined like the rivers that fed the plains. The idea, born in the glow of an autumn sunset, had grown into reality with the sweat and hope of a community. Ethan and Sarah cleared a plot near the cabin, raising a log schoolhouse with help from neighbors like Mrs. Larson and Dr. Benjamin Harris. Caleb, now 9, hauled timber with a boy's boundless energy, his dark eyes bright with purpose. "It'll be like the stories," he told Sarah, his voice echoing his father's dream of knowledge as power. "Cheyenne tales and settler books all together." Sarah smiled, ruffling his hair, But her heart carried a quiet fear. Clearwater's prejudice, led by men like Baxter, had not faded, and a school bridging worlds was a spark to their smoldering resentment. The school's opening day dawned crisp, the air sharp with the scent of pine and promise. Sarah stood at the schoolhouse door, a simple structure adorned with a carved buffalo above the lintel, a nod to Cheyenne heritage, crafted by Ethan's steady hands. Inside, benches lined the room, a blackboard gleamed, and a pot-bellied stove promised warmth through winter. Margaret Harris, her silver hair gleaming, had volunteered to teach. Her Arapaho roots and schoolteachers passed a perfect fit. 10 children arrived, 5 from Clearwater, including Mrs. Larson's granddaughter Ellie, and 5 Cheyenne, sent by traders from the Arapaho settlement, their families trusting Sarah's vision. Caleb, proud in a new shirt stitched with Cheyenne beadwork, greeted each child, his ease a bridge between their worlds. "This is where we learn everything," he told Ellie, showing her a slate. "Stories about Coyote and how to read Treasure Island." Ellie, her braids bouncing, grinned. "Can you teach me Cheyenne words?" Caleb's nod was solemn, a young ambassador of his heritage. Sarah watched, her heart swelling, but Ethan's hand on her shoulder steadied her against the undercurrent of doubt. "Baxter's been talking in town," he murmured. "Says this school's a den of trouble. We need to be ready." The first weeks were a delicate dance of harmony and tension. Margaret taught arithmetic and Longfellow's poetry, while Sarah shared Cheyenne star stories, mapping constellations like the 7 sisters on clear nights. The children, quick to bond, swapped tales of frontier adventures and tribal legends, their laughter a defiance of the adults' divisions. Caleb shone, his reading now rivaling older students, his translations of Cheyenne phrases earning Ellie's awe. Yet whispers from Clearwater grew louder. Baxter, backed by a faction of hardline settlers, petitioned the mayor to shut the school, claiming it stirred unrest and harbored savages. The threat became reality on a late October morning, when hoofbeats thundered toward the ranch. Baxter led a dozen men, their faces grim, some clutching rifles, others torches that flickered like omens. Ethan met them at the schoolhouse, Sarah and Caleb at his side, the children huddled inside with Margaret. "This ends now, Caldwell," Baxter barked, his voice thick with whiskey and hate. "Your school's a blight, mixing our kids with theirs. Hand over the Cheyenne brats or we'll burn it down." The crowd murmured, some uneasy, others nodding, their fear of the other fanned by Baxter's lies. Sarah stepped forward, her Cheyenne pride aflame in her eyes. "These children learn together," she said, her voice clear as a mountain stream. "They're not yours or ours, they are the future." "You'd burn that for your hate," Baxter sneered, but before he could retort, Caleb darted out, standing between his mother and the mob. "We're not hurting anyone," he shouted, his small frame trembling but unyielding. "We're learning to be better than you." The words, raw and true, silenced the crowd, shame flickering in some eyes. Ethan raised his rifle, not aiming but ready. "This is our land," he said, his voice a low growl. "You want trouble, you'll find it. But you'll answer to more than me." As if summoned, Dr. Harris rode up, leading a posse of Clearwater's fair-minded, Mrs. Larson, Samuel Green, and others who'd warmed to the ranch's vision. "Enough, Baxter," Harris said, his authority cutting through the tension. "The mayor's seen the school. It's got his blessing. You're the one stirring trouble." Baxter's men wavered, the torches lowering as the posse's numbers matched their own. Mrs. Larson stepped forward, her voice sharp. "My Ellie's learning more here than she ever did in town." "You'd rob her of that." The crowd fractured, some slinking away, others muttering apologies. Baxter, isolated, spat on the ground. "This ain't over, Caldwell," he growled, but mounted his horse and rode off, his men trailing like a defeated pack. The school endured, its roots deepening with each passing month. Winter brought snow, but the stove kept the children warm, their voices blending in lessons and laughter. Caleb, now a leader among his peers, taught Ellie to sing a Cheyenne lullaby, while she shared her grandfather's tales of crossing the Oregon Trail. Sarah and Ethan, their bond forged in fire, expanded the ranch, their herd growing, their fields promising a bountiful spring. Margaret's daughter, visiting from Denver, began documenting the school's story, her pen capturing a West where hope outshone hate. One evening, as the North Star burned bright above the Rockies, Sarah stood with Ethan and Caleb on the schoolhouse steps, the buffalo carving glowing in the moonlight. "We did this," Sarah said, her hand in Ethan's, the sagebrush ring a steady weight. "A place where Caleb can be both Cheyenne and frontiersman, where no child has to hide." Ethan pulled her close, Caleb leaning against them. "It's more than a school," he said. "It's a legacy, proof that love can build what hate tries to burn." Caleb looked up, his eyes tracing the stars. "Like the seven sisters," he said, recalling Sarah's stories. "They shine together no matter how far apart." The Rockies stood witness, their peaks eternal, as a family and a community carved a new West. Clearwater's wounds would heal slowly, but the school on the ridge was a seed, its roots spreading, promising a future where two worlds could not just coexist, but thrive as one. A horizon unwritten. The wagon rolled north from Dawn Creek, its wheels carving a path through the Colorado spring, as Sarah, Red Willow, and Caleb left behind the man who had become their shelter in a merciless winter. The Rocky Mountains loomed, their peaks softened by a haze of new green, a silent witness to the journey ahead. Sarah's hand rested on the small wooden box in her pocket, the gold ring within etched with sagebrush leaves. A question, a promise, a possibility from Ethan Caldwell. Beside her, Caleb waved until Ethan's figure, standing with his roan and the gentle mare Sage, faded into the pines. Only then did he turn to his mother, his dark eyes serious beyond his 9 years. "We'll come back, won't we?" Sarah drew him close, her cheek pressed to his hair, the scent of sagebrush lingering from the pouch he clutched, a parting gift from Ethan. "We'll try, my heart," she said, her voice steady but threaded with the weight of uncertainty. "First, we must find Aunt Abigail, ensure our people know we live. We honor our blood, our roots." She met his gaze, her Cheyenne resolve aflame against the unknown. "But if they are safe, if they don't need us, we'll see where our path leads." Caleb nodded, settling against her, his trust a quiet anchor. He understood, in his child's way, the delicate balance she held, between the Cheyenne heritage that shaped them and the unexpected haven they'd found in a settler's cabin. The trail to Hunter's Rock stretched before them, a ribbon of earth and hope winding through valleys where wildflowers danced and streams sang with snowmelt's exuberance. Dr. Benjamin Harris drove the wagon, his silence respectful, giving Sarah space to wrestle with the choice that loomed. The Arapaho guides awaited, their settlement a chance to reconnect with her people, to learn if Abigail and her nephew had survived the flames of Clearwater's raid. Yet Ethan's words echoed, "I'll be here, whatever you decide." His kiss, brief and gentle, lingered on her lips, a first spark of something neither had dared name, a bridge between worlds that seemed impossible yet undeniable. As the wagon climbed higher, the Rockies' grandeur unfolded, their vastness a mirror to Sarah's heart. She thought of her village, its longhouses now ash, its songs carried only in memory. She thought of Caleb, his laughter reborn in Ethan's cabin, his quick mind bridging Cheyenne tales and settler books. She thought of Ethan, alone now, clutching a carved wooden buffalo, his blue eyes holding a hope he'd thought buried with his wife and daughter. The ring's weight was both comfort and challenge, a symbol of a life where Caleb could be both Cheyenne warrior and frontier scholar, where she could be both healer and partner without losing herself. The North Star emerged as dusk fell, a steady point in a sky swirling with possibility. Caleb pointed to it, his voice soft. "Mister." Ethan said it stays still like the cabin while we move. Sarah smiled, her hand on his shoulder. "It does, my son. It guides us, no matter where we go." The words felt like a vow, not to a single path, but to the courage to choose, to weave a future from the threads of past and present. Would they find Abigail, her strength intact, ready to rebuild with the Cheyenne? Would the Arapaho settlement demand Sarah's healing skills, her presence to mend a fractured community? Or would the pull of Ethan's ranch, its promise of a family forged in fire, draw them back? The wagon crested a ridge, Hunter's Rock looming in the distance, its silhouette a sacred marker against the twilight. Sarah's gaze stretched beyond, to the unseen settlement, to the sister who might wait, to the people who carried her blood. Then, unbidden, it drifted south to a cabin in a valley, where a man stood under the same stars, his heart open, his hand closed around a promise. The West was a land of harsh divides and fragile hopes, of winters that broke and springs that healed. Sarah, Caleb, and Ethan stood at its edge, their story unfinished, a tapestry half-woven. What lay ahead, reunion or separation, roots or wings, remained unwritten, carried on the wind that whispered through the Rockies. For now, Sarah held Caleb close, the ring's box a quiet pulse against her hip, and faced the horizon, ready to meet whatever it held, knowing that the North Star, like their courage, would never fade.